If you're here, you're in for a story that will shake you to your core. This one's got twists, tension, and a truth that'll leave you speechless. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe because what you're about to hear, well, let's just say it's something the world needs to see. It all started on an ordinary afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where the lawns were always neatly trimmed, where kids rode their bikes without a care, and where the biggest problem of the day was deciding what to grill for dinner. But on this day, something was about to shatter that perfect picture book illusion. 17-year-old Malik Carter had just finished basketball practice. His muscles ached, and sweat clung to his skin as he walked down the sidewalk, bouncing the worn-out ball in his hands. He was on his way to his best friend Jason's house, a route he'd taken 100 times before. But today something felt different. The air was thick, heavy with the kind of silence that made his instincts tingle. He noticed a few lingering stares from porch-sitting neighbors. A woman across the street pulled her child inside the moment he passed by. And then there was her, a middle-aged white woman, standing in her pristine driveway, arms crossed, eyes locked on him like he had a target on his back. Karen Whitmore. The name alone would make sense of what came next. She was dressed in pastel-colored workout clothes, a water bottle in one hand, and her cell phone in the other. Her expression was hard, skeptical. Malik tried not to pay her any attention. He had dealt with women like her before, always watching, always assuming, always questioning why a black kid was walking through their neighborhood. But as he passed her house, she took a step forward. Then another. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp. Malik stopped, turning to face her. "Yes." Her gaze flickered down to the basketball in his hands, then back up to his face. "What are you doing here?" He exhaled slowly, keeping his voice calm. "I'm going to my friend Jason's house." Karen folded her arms tighter. "Jason who?" Now Malik was annoyed. He wasn't about to explain himself to some stranger who clearly thought he didn't belong here. "Jason Monroe," he said. "He lives right over there." He pointed down the street, towards the white and blue house where he had spent countless afternoons. Karen didn't even glance in that direction. She was too busy scrutinizing him. "Never seen you before," she said. Malik sighed. "Well, I've been here plenty of times. I don't know what to tell you." Karen's lips pursed. She was the kind of woman who thrived on control, on feeling like she had authority. And right now, Malik wasn't giving her what she wanted. "Do you live around here?" she pressed. "No," he answered, jaw tightening. "But..." "So, you don't belong here," she cut him off. Malik's grip on his basketball tightened. He could feel the weight of the moment, the way the air shifted. He could feel the invisible walls of prejudice closing in, as they always did in situations like this. Karen reached for her phone, lifting it to her ear. "I'm calling the police," she announced, as if she was doing the neighborhood some grand favor. Malik blinked, stunned. "For what?" She tilted her chin. "Suspicious activity." Malik couldn't believe it. He was the suspicious activity? A teenager walking down the street with a basketball? "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Karen didn't answer. She was already talking into the phone. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious individual in the neighborhood," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Young black male wearing a hoodie, carrying a basketball. I don't know what he's up to, but he looks like he's casing the houses." Malik's stomach twisted. Casing the houses? She was making it sound like he was planning a robbery. He looked down the street, debating whether to walk away or wait. He didn't want to run. That would make things worse. But he also didn't want to stand there like a sitting duck, waiting for the cops to roll up and treat him like a criminal. Then something in him snapped. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice firm. Karen smirked. She actually smirked. "We'll see about that." Minutes passed, tension crackling in the air. And then the sirens came. A black and white police cruiser rolled up, flashing lights cutting through the setting sun. 2 officers stepped out, hands hovering near their belts. Malik swallowed hard. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. One officer, a tall white man with a buzz cut, approached Karen first. "Ma'am, You reported a suspicious individual? Karen pointed, full of confidence. Yes, that's him. The officer turned to Malik, his expression unreadable. What's your name, son? Malik forced himself to stand tall. Malik Carter. The officer nodded slowly. And what are you doing here? Malik clenched his fists, trying to keep his frustration in check. Walking to my friend's house. Karen scoffed. That's what they all say. She muttered under her breath. That was it. That was the moment everything was about to change. Because before the officer could say another word, another car pulled up to the curb. But this wasn't a police cruiser. It was a sleek, government-issued black SUV. The door swung open, and out stepped a tall, commanding black woman in a dark pantsuit. Her stride was sharp, her presence undeniable. She didn't just look important. She was important. And the second Malik saw her face, the tension in his body melted into something else entirely. Because this wasn't just anyone. This was his mother. And she wasn't just anybody. She was Special Agent Brielle Carter of the FBI. Karen's smug expression evaporated the moment Brielle's gaze landed on her. And in that instant, she knew. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The moment the black SUV door swung open, the entire energy in the air shifted. It was like the sun had just dimmed, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Karen's once smug expression wavered as Special Agent Brielle Carter stepped out, exuding the kind of authority that made even trained law enforcement pause. She wasn't just Malik's mother. She was an FBI agent, and she was about to turn this whole situation upside down. Before we dive into what happens next, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, because trust me, this is the kind of story that will make you rethink everything. Brielle closed the SUV door with a controlled thud, her gaze sharp as a blade as she scanned the scene before her. Her eyes landed on Malik first. She saw the way he was standing, shoulders squared, fists clenched, the tension in his jaw. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She already knew. Then she turned to the two officers. One of them, the taller one with the buzz cut, had taken a step forward, his hands still hovering near his belt. The other officer, a stockier man with a mustache, looked more uncertain, shifting awkwardly under her scrutiny. But it was Karen who drew Brielle's focus next. The woman had gone rigid, her hands gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Brielle took a step closer, and Karen took a step back. I'm Special Agent Brielle Carter, she said, her voice smooth yet firm, carrying the weight of someone who had commanded rooms far more intimidating than this. And you are. Karen's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. Karen Whitmore. Brielle nodded slowly, as if committing the name to memory. Then she looked at the officers. And you are. The buzzcut officer straightened his posture. Officer Reynolds, ma'am. This is Officer Daniels. Good, Brielle said. Now, tell me, why exactly are you questioning my son? Reynolds glanced at Karen, then back at Brielle. We received a call about a suspicious individual in the neighborhood. Brielle's eyebrow lifted. A suspicious individual? She turned to Karen. Karen's mouth opened and closed, her confidence visibly crumbling under Brielle's gaze. I didn't know he was your son, she stammered. I just saw him walking, and he looked out of place. Brielle exhaled sharply through her nose. Out of place. Karen hesitated, as if realizing she had just dug herself into a hole. I mean, she fumbled. I've never seen him around before, and you know, there have been some break-ins in the area. Brielle's lips pressed together in a thin line. So, let me get this straight. You saw a young black man walking through your neighborhood, and your first instinct was to call the police on him. Karen's face was turning a deeper shade of red by the second. It wasn't like that. I was just being cautious. Brielle's jaw tightened. Cautious. Her voice was like ice. Tell me, Karen, how many white teenagers have you called the cops on for walking through your neighborhood? Karen flinched. Reynolds cleared his throat. Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but we were just responding to a call. No, Officer Reynolds. Brielle cut in, turning her full attention to him now. You were responding to a false report. My son was walking to his friend's house. He was doing absolutely nothing wrong. And yet, instead of approaching this situation with common sense, you treated him like a suspect. Daniels, the mustached officer, shifted uncomfortably. Look, ma'am, we're just doing our job. Doing your job? Brielle echoed, her voice dropping an octave. No, your job is to serve and protect. Your job is to assess situations before escalating them. Tell me, when you got here, did Malik seem like he was committing a crime? Reynolds hesitated. No, but what? Brielle's eyes flashed. Did he have weapons? Stolen property? Anything that remotely justified stopping him? Neither officer spoke. Brielle let the silence stretch. Then she turned back to Karen. I'm going to say this once, she said, her tone deadly calm. If you ever target my son or any other black child without cause again, I will personally see to it that you're held accountable. Do you understand me? Karen's lips trembled. She nodded, barely able to make eye contact. Brielle exhaled, the storm in her chest barely contained. Then she turned back to Malik. Are you okay? She asked, her voice softening just for him. Malik gave a small nod, though his jaw was still tight. Yeah, I can't believe this keeps happening. Brielle's heart clenched, because she couldn't either. She took a step closer to him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I know, baby, but listen to me, you did nothing wrong. You hear me? Malik nodded, but the frustration in his eyes didn't fade. Brielle turned back to the officers. I expect a full report filed on this incident, and I will be following up. Reynolds and Daniels exchanged looks, clearly realizing they had stepped into something much bigger than they'd anticipated. Yes, ma'am, Daniels said. Brielle gave them one last look before taking Malik's arm. Come on, she said. Let's go. As they walked away, Karen stood frozen, her face pale, her breath shaky, because she had thought she was in control. She had thought her word would be enough. She had thought she could get away with it. But now she knew the truth. She had just messed with the wrong mother. And this wasn't over. Brielle and Malik walked in silence as they headed back to the car. But the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Malik's fists were still clenched at his sides, his shoulders tense. Brielle could feel his anger simmering just beneath the surface. She knew that feeling all too well. The injustice, the frustration, the exhaustion of always having to prove you belong. She wanted to tell him to shake it off, to let it go. But she also knew that wasn't fair. Before we continue, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. This story isn't just a moment. It's a reality for too many people, and the more we talk about it, the more we can change it. As Brielle unlocked the SUV, Malik finally broke the silence. She really thought she could just call the cops on me for walking down the street, he muttered, shaking his head. Like I don't even have the right to exist in her neighborhood. Brielle sighed, resting a hand on his shoulder before speaking. Some people don't need a real reason, baby. They just need an excuse. Malik turned to face her, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. But why? I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't even looking at anyone's house. I had my headphones in. How do I look suspicious just for existing? Brielle's heart ached, because she had no good answer. Because the truth was, Karen hadn't seen a teenager walking to his friend's house. She had seen a threat. She had seen her own fears instead of a human being. Brielle had spent years training to spot criminals. She had learned to read body language, to detect deception, to assess real threats. And yet, this woman, this entitled, privileged woman, had taken one look at her son and decided he didn't belong. And that was dangerous, because when people like Karen made accusations, the system often listened. Brielle had seen the consequences. She had investigated cases where things like this didn't end with a conversation. They ended with handcuffs, with criminal records, with funerals. She inhaled sharply and looked Malik in the eyes. You're right to be mad, but I need you to promise me something. Malik frowned. What? I need you to stay smart. His jaw clenched. You mean stay quiet? Keep my head down. No, she shook her head. I mean, know when to fight and know when to let me handle it. Because some people don't care about right and wrong. They just want an excuse to see you as the problem. Malik looked down, frustration still written all over his face. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept it. No, Brielle's voice was firm. You never accept it, but you outsmart it. You document it. You make sure the world sees it. Malik exhaled, running a hand over his face. I hate this. I know, baby. Brielle squeezed his shoulder. But this isn't over. Malik frowned. What do you mean? Brielle's gaze darkened as she glanced back toward Karen, who was still standing by the police officers, looking completely rattled. I mean, she said, her voice dropping. She just messed with the wrong person. Karen's hands were still shaking as she sat at her kitchen table, gripping a glass of wine like it was the only thing keeping her steady. This was not how today was supposed to go. She had expected the police to show up, ask the kid a few questions, and send him on his way. Maybe even give him a warning about wandering around neighborhoods where he didn't belong. But instead, his mother had shown up. And not just any mother. A federal agent. The way Brielle had looked at her, it still sent chills down Karen's spine. She had never been on the receiving end of that kind of authority before, and it terrified her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. She grabbed it quickly, expecting a message from one of her neighbors. Instead, she froze, because the screen was filled with hundreds of notifications, text messages, missed calls, and worst of all, social media tags. Heart pounding, she tapped on one. A video started playing. Her breath caught in her throat. It was her, standing on the sidewalk, pointing at Malik, angrily talking to the cops. The camera angle was shaky, but it was clear enough to see everything. And the caption? White woman calls cops on black teen for no reason. Watch what happens when his FBI mom shows up. Karen's stomach dropped. The comments were brutal. This is why we don't trust concerned citizens. She really thought she could get away with this. Not today. Hope she enjoys her 5 minutes of fame. Racist Karens stay losing. Karen's face burned with humiliation. How had this happened so fast? She scrolled through the video, her hands trembling. It had already been shared thousands of times. Her name, her face, her entire reputation ruined. Her phone rang. Her husband. She hesitated, then answered with a shaky voice. Honey, what the hell did you do? He snapped. Do you have any idea what's happening online right now? People are sending messages to my job. The HOA is talking about a vote to remove us from the neighborhood. Karen's heart slammed against her ribs. What? That's ridiculous. I was just... No, Karen. His voice was ice cold. You weren't just anything. You profiled a black teenager. And now the whole damn world knows it. Tears welled in Karen's eyes. But I didn't mean. I don't care what you meant. He cut her off. I care that you just made our entire family the face of racism. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out, because for the first time she realized this wasn't going away. And Brielle? She wasn't done with her yet. Karen sat frozen at her kitchen table, the glow of her phone screen casting sharp shadows across her pale face. The world outside her window had gone dark, but the firestorm online was only getting brighter, burning everything in its path. Her name was everywhere. Her face was in news articles, in Twitter threads, in TikToks with millions of views. Every comment, every DM, every missed call was a reminder that she wasn't just a woman who made a mistake. She was the villain now. Her husband had retreated upstairs after his explosive phone call, slamming the bedroom door. Her neighbors had stopped returning her texts, and now there were reporters outside her house. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to be here, hiding in her own home, fearing every knock on the door. Karen gripped her phone tighter, scrolling through the headlines. White woman calls cops on black teen. FBI agent mother exposes her. Caught on camera. When privilege backfires. She thought she could get away with it, until the internet fought back. Her breath quickened. She needed to get ahead of this. She needed to fix this. Before we continue, like, share, and subscribe. Because this story isn't just about one woman's mistake. It's about what happens when the truth refuses to be buried. Karen took a deep breath and hit dial. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked. A smooth, controlled voice answered. "This is Special Agent Brielle Carter." Karen swallowed hard. She could hear nothing in the background. No traffic. No typing. Just silence. Like Brielle had been waiting for her call. Hello, Karen stammered. "This is. I know who this is." Karen closed her eyes. This was a mistake. She should have waited. Should have let the news cycle move on. But no, she thought she could control the damage, like she always had. She forced a breath and tried to keep her voice steady. "Listen, I wanted to talk. Woman to woman." Silence. Karen licked her lips, her throat dry. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I was just trying to." "To what?" Brielle's voice was cool, unshaken. "To protect your neighborhood? To call the police on a child? To make sure they came with their hands on their guns?" Karen flinched. I didn't know he was your son." "You shouldn't have had to," Brielle shot back. "You shouldn't have called anyone's son a criminal just because he didn't look like he belonged." Karen felt her stomach twist. I thought he was acting suspicious." "Suspicious how?" Brielle pressed. "Was he running? Hiding? Was he looking into windows?" Karen hesitated. She had nothing, because Malik had just been walking. That was the ugliest part of all this. She hadn't seen anything. She had just felt something. And in that moment, she had trusted her fear more than his humanity. Brielle spoke again, her voice colder now. "Say it, Karen." Karen blinked. "Say what?" "Say you saw a black boy in your neighborhood and assumed the worst." I didn't." "Say it." Karen felt something deep inside her crack. The truth, the real truth, clawed at her throat. But she couldn't say it, because if she did, it would make everything real. So instead, she exhaled shakily and whispered, "I just want to make this right." Another long silence. Then Brielle sighed, her voice quieter. "I'm going to tell you something, Karen, and I need you to really listen." Karen held her breath. "You don't get to make this right." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, because she knew deep down Brielle was right. The damage was done. Malik would remember this moment for the rest of his life. The world would remember her for the rest of hers. And no amount of apologies could erase that. Brielle spoke one last time. "I suggest you think long and hard about the choices you've made. Because the next time you decide to weaponize the police, the person on the other end might not have an FBI agent for a mother." Then the line went dead. Karen sat there, the silence pressing down on her like a weight she could never lift. And for the first time in her life, she felt powerless. The days that followed were nothing short of a nightmare for Karen. She had thought the internet storm would die down, that people would move on. But it only got worse. Her name wasn't just in news headlines anymore. It was in emails to her job. It was in calls to the PTA at her children's school. It was in letters from her homeowners association. Her husband had stopped speaking to her entirely. Her so-called friends had gone silent. And every time she stepped outside, she could feel the stares. Karen used to walk this neighborhood with confidence. Now, she rushed to her car with her head down, avoiding eye contact. She was trapped. Not in handcuffs, not behind bars, but in the very world she had helped create, the one where assumptions could destroy lives. She just never expected it to be hers. Before we continue, like, share, and subscribe. Because this story is bigger than one woman's mistake. It's about what happens when the world stops letting people hide from their actions. Across town, Malik sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. His name was trending. His story was everywhere. And for once, people were listening. "I still can't believe this," he muttered. Brielle sat next to him, her gaze calm but serious. "Believe it." Malik exhaled sharply. "So what happens now?" Brielle studied him for a moment. "That depends on you." Malik frowned. "What do you mean?" "You have a voice now. People are paying attention. Brielle leaned forward. You can let this be just another internet scandal that fades away, or you can turn it into something bigger. Malik's fingers tightened around his phone. Like what? Brielle's expression softened. Like making sure the next kid in your position isn't alone. Malik swallowed hard. He had spent years being told to keep his head down, to move quietly, to not make waves. But now he had a choice. And as he looked at the thousands of comments, people sharing their own stories, their own fears, their own anger, he knew what he had to do. This isn't over, he said, locking eyes with his mother. Brielle smiled, a quiet pride in her gaze. No, baby, it's just beginning. As for Karen, she thought deleting her social media, changing her number, and staying inside would make the world forget. But she was wrong, because the world wasn't letting her decide when this ended. And whether she liked it or not, she had to face the consequences, because this time, she was the one who didn't belong.